Ladies and gentlemen, the build you are about to see is real. No names have been changed, as no one is innocent. Aloha, and welcome to another 9th Island RC. Today is the day I finally put together the RX28SE. But I'm gonna have to do it in a strange way because, well, I'm working and today is the Pro Bowl. I'm gonna have to do little short video snippets instead of recording the full build, and I'll probably end up including just some photos as well. So let's get to the build. Alrighty, starting with the RX28SE assembly guide, we're gonna start with steps 1 and 2. And for that, you're going to need the motor pod pieces, including the brass and the carbon fiber piece. You'll need 4 of the M2x4 countersunk screws. You're going to need 2 of the ball studs, which will be attached using 2 M2x3 countersunk screws. You're going to need a pre-mounted ball stud, and you're going to need 2 more ball studs with M2x4 millimeter set screws. So I'm going to build that, and then I will show you the finished product. Alrighty, there you have the motor mount assembly completed. It should be noted that to complete these first 2 steps, you will need your 0.9, 1.5, and 1.3 millimeter hex wrenches. For step 1, you will use both the 0.9 and the 1.5, and for step 2, you'll be using the 1.5 and the 1.3. Next up, time to attach the motor mount to the chassis. Moving on to step 3. Okay, so moving on to step 3. You'll need the partially completed motor mount. Obviously, you'll need the chassis. You'll need the 2 links. And for hardware, you'll need 2 M2x3s, 2 of the ball studs, and 4 of the short M1.2 millimeter screws. Now, the instructions are basically telling you to put the screws into the links after the links are attached to the motor mount chassis plate. Honestly, I would recommend putting the screws into the links first and then go to install the balls on the chassis and connect everything. So that's what you'll need. You will need your 1.5 millimeter, and you will now need your number 0 Phillips screwdriver. So, gonna put those together, and we'll be back. Stay tuned. Okay, there you have step 3 completed. You'll see that the side screws. There we go. Side screws are definitely tightened against, so there's almost no play on the left side. Now you will notice that the screw on this side is not tightened at all, and that's because you do have to be very careful. There's, you can see there's a lot of play right here, and that's because the hex on the screw stripped when I was tightening it, so I'm gonna have to somehow get that out and put a new one in. Thankfully, you are given extra parts for this, extra hardware parts, so I will fix that problem later. But there you have it. You can see how it kind kind of works like a gimbal system, a little different. Okay, so moving on to step 4. Okay, move on to step 4. For step 4, you're going to need the tweak brace. You're going to need 2 M2x6 set screws. You're going to need 2 of the spring perches and 2 O-rings. Now the reason you only see 1 is if you look, if I can get this in focus, you can see that I've already installed the rubber O-ring on 1. Then you'll also need your 2 side springs and 2 M2x4 screws. These will be for attaching the tweak brace to the chassis. Be back when that's completed. Okay, so I've started step 4. Obviously I put the first O-ring on there, but in regards to the plate, try and get this in focus. You see the blue. Now it says to put some blue thread lock on so that, obviously the plastic here, which these will be holding the springs, so that they don't, just randomly rotate. It says to put some thread lock on the screws, on the set screws. What I would recommend doing is put it on and let it sit. I put that on, I went and had lunch, and I came back and it's dry. So now I will continue with the rest of step 4. And there you have step 4 complete. You can see that it has a little spring to it. Bounces back. Yep, should be good. Except for, again, the one screw that I have to fix there. But okay, let's see what we can get with step 5. Before moving on to step 5, just realized I have a slight correction. Forgot the 2 balls. So, yep, you need 2 of the 3.5mm pivot balls, and attaching those to the plate via using 2 M2x4mm screws. Okay, now on to step 5. So step 5 is a pretty quick and easy one. Basically, you're putting your side tubes together. You got the 2 pistons, you got the 2 outer tubes, and you have the 2 ball cups. Attaching ball cups to the pistons, inserting the pistons into the tubes, and then snapping them into place between these 2 and between these 2. That's it. Get yourself some 30,000 grease or something close to it. Put it on here, work it into the tubes before popping them on. I'm not going to do that part now because I don't have the grease with me, but I will redo that later. And there you have step 5 complete. I do recommend, I shouldn't say I recommend, they recommend the tubes being on the outside, the pistons being on the inside. Again, I will be removing these, and actually I'll keep the 2 outer ones attached. I'll just pop off the inner ones to get the grease on, and then put it back together. So there you have things so far. And there's plenty of movement. Now step 6. Okay, so quick step back, or should I say several steps back. Evidently, and I'm sure some of you who are watching this might have even figured this out, in step 1 I forgot the rear center shock mount. As you can see, it is installed now. However, a bonus, in installing this, I discovered that for these 2 balls, I actually forgot to put thread lock. So now that I know that, I still am not putting thread lock on it. Reason, as I mentioned, I still need to grease the two side tubes, and with there being no thread lock on these, that'll actually make it very easy to just unscrew, keeping the ball still attached, do the grease, get it worked in, then add the thread lock and put these two back in. So now time to install the front shock mount. So as I said, moving on to step 6. To start with, gonna need, I have to find where I put it, but another one of these shock mounts that'll be mounted here, and these are the parts of the shock itself. So after a lot of fidgeting and correcting a mistake, step 6 is done. The mistake was the front shock center mount, or the front center shock mount. I accidentally mounted backwards so that this part where the screw would be was actually way back here. It is corrected now. Also, instructions say to put 1mm shim under each of these, the front and the back. However, as you can see, the angle, here, I'll tilt this so that it's a bit more. So you can see how there's a slight upward angle as it goes back. With 1mm shim in the back, it was raked even higher. So instead of being just a slight incline from front to rear, it was more like that. So I removed the 1mm shim from the back, keeping the front, and that actually gives it a much better angle and more accurate. I don't know what to call it, flexing or whatever, but there's no binding. That's what really matters. Obviously, I have not totally adjusted the spring. I do have this 1.5 millimeters approximately, as the manual suggests, and you can see that it actually looks pretty decent. So, guess I could say it's time for step 6. Nope, sorry, that was 6. Time for step 7. Okay, on second thought, we're still on step 6. I'm really finding these, some steps are 1 page, most steps are 2 pages. There's a couple of steps that are 3 pages. This turns out to be one of them, because what's missing? The body lock plate. And there you have step 6, finally completed correctly. Okay, so here we are, step 7, and finally time to install the rear axle carrier. To install it, you will need 4 of the M2x6 screws. Recommend installing the 2 bottom ones first, just partly, just enough where then you can lower this down onto them and then install the top screws. Just note, I will not be installing the bearings, at least not yet, and that's because I'm not going to install the rear axle yet. I will not be using the kit axle, at least not entirely. I will be using the axle itself, but I will not be using the diff. Yellow diff has to be used, or the gear, the spur gear, so gonna hold off, just gonna get the axle carrier installed. Okay, we have the rear axle carrier installed, as you can see. Now I recommend when you first install this, do not use Loctite. And the reason is, if you're familiar with the PN Racing motor mount, then you know it uses eccentric bearing holders that you can position the axle at any one of 4 different heights. You've got a standard 1 down, 1 up, and a 2 up, or maybe it's the other way around. This uses something different. As you can see, it slides, and that's the whole reason for having those oval shaped, cut throughs, so that you can adjust the axle height where you want it. And instead of 4 predefined positions that are each off by, I believe, with the PN, I believe it's 0.5 millimeter, might be 0.75, but I believe it's 0.5 millimeter. This gives you much finer control. You can set it where you want it. So what I recommend doing is, when you don't Loctite it until after you've fully built everything, electronics installed, you know what your body weight is with battery. Get it set to exactly where you really want it. Then remove just 1 screw at a time, put Loctite on it, put it back in, Loctite it down. Move to the next screw, do the same thing. Do the same thing with the last 2 screws. That way it holds position and you don't have to worry about it. I recommend, even for other things where you have multiple screws holding it, X-Max, where you have 4 screws holding the motor slider in place. Even screws that are used for servo mounts, where it's a slightly adjustable servo mount, do the same thing. Have all 4 tightened, once you get it into the exact position you want, and then remove each screw one by one, Loctite, lock it down, move on to the next. So that's it for there. Alrighty, so most of step 7 is complete, and holding off on the final part of it for a reason, which you'll soon see. But just to let everyone know, if you look in there, you can actually see a little blue. You see a little blue. So I have added the grease to the 2 side tubes as well as the center spring. Instead of using Kyosho 30,000 grease as the directions indicate, what I'm actually using is Maxima waterproof grease. This is a synthetic grease, so it can be used with plastic. I've been using this on my boats and my crawlers and never had any problems. It actually works fantastic. And we're going to skip for now pages 24 through 37, although technically 24 through 36. 37 starts the drivetrain assembly, and for that we're going to start off with page 38, building the diff. As you can see, got most of the parts laid out here, and if you look over here, you can see 6 of the diff balls. Now the reason only using 6 and not all is because we're not going to be using the included spur. We will be using the designated spec'd yellow spur gear 53 tooth, if I remember correctly. So there's the parts laid out, and gonna put that together, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so there is the completed diff. And what I've done is I've set the tension so that it's not, I wouldn't say difficult to turn, but it also doesn't turn freely if you're holding this really tightly. The axle shaft itself, and it does spin, but it's not, like I said, it's got a firm grip, so that should be good. Couple of tips if you've never built a ball diff before is to put some grease on, there's 2 diff plates. There's one on the bottom and one on the top. Once you put the first diff plate down, and the little triangle, or piece there, I forget what it's called, but I put a little bit of grease on each of those 3 tabs on the top side, and then put the diff plate on it so that it holds together pretty well. It's not gonna, you could take it, without everything else and shake it, and the diff plate would not fall off of that piece. The pressure plate. That's what it's called, pressure plate. So, that, and then put a decent amount of the grease on the top of the diff plate. Then put the spur gear on, then put the balls in, and then I put, again, a good amount of the diff grease there. Some people, they'll take the balls and they'll cover them with grease and put them in a little bowl or something to put them in one by one. And based on a tip from somebody else, just found that it's actually easier to just put the gear in and then put the balls in and then put the grease in. And then once you get it put together, spin it around a few times, and that will actually distribute the grease pretty evenly all the way around. You might want to spin it in both directions. Now for this, for this spur gear, you actually have 2 options. Actually, I should say 3. There are 12 diff ball holes. 6 of them are circular, 6 of them are kind of oblong, oval shaped. So putting them in the circular ones will give you the freest movement. Putting them in the oval will give you a limited slip diff, which is how I've got this set. And then if you put 12 diff balls in, that will give you a locked diff, or at least it's supposed to. I haven't actually tried it, but that should give you a locked diff. So there we've got the rear axle all complete, and now we can move on to finishing step 7, which is installing the axle along with the bearings. I'll get that done and be right back. Okay, so there we now have step 7 completed. You can see the diff and the rear axle is completely installed. And, it might be a little difficult to see, but there is just a little bit of play. Now, the instructions do say to, when you're installing the drive on this side, it says to install it so that there is 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters of play side to side. That way you don't get any binding. There's a nice little super easy trick to that. Your average piece of paper is 0.1 millimeters. If you fold the paper over, that's technically 2.2 millimeters, but so what you do is slide get the grub screw in first, or setting screw as they call it in the manual. Slide it on, leaving a large gap, say, 2 to 3 millimeters space. Then slide that folded piece of paper right down in between, up against the little black brass shim. Then push the drive up against the paper. And when I say push it, I mean literally push it and hold it nice and tight, so that what you're probably ending up with is approximately 0.15, dead center between the 0.1 and 0.2 millimeters that they recommend. If the piece of paper, literally can fall out, then you've probably left too much space. If you cannot pull the piece of paper out, then obviously it's too little space. Basically it's using the same trick that a lot of people use to, get their mesh between their spur and their pinion. The paper trick, as a lot call it. So I basically am doing the same thing to set the play here. Now, you might be able to see just very minimal movement. So that wobble, as I've been told, is kind of common and standard. It's not that it's seriously that off. It's just how it's set. Once the pinion is installed, it will hold it pretty firmly. So there we go, step 7 complete. Okay, so moving over to step 8, it is time to install the steering servo. For that, you will obviously need your servo, the servo horn, the 2 servo pivot balls, the servo mounts, the servo crossbar, or servo mount crossbar, and 6 of the M4x4 button head. Okay, so we've got step 8 complete. But before I go over it, I do want to apologize. I miscounted on M2x4 screws. A 7th one is actually needed. And obviously, as anybody probably figured out, I forgot to include the screw holding the servo horn to the servo. Let me pass along a few tips. First, while you do want to Loctite the 2 screws holding the servo to the servo mounts, it is advisable, at least for now, not to Loctite these 4. The reason is that these 2 allow you to adjust the servo's left-right position, and these 2 allow you to adjust the forward-back position. So until you have everything else installed, I would highly recommend leaving these 4 screws without Loctite. Now the final tip is, in the instructions it actually tells you to attach the horn after attaching everything else to the chassis. What I recommend is attaching the horn to the servo before you attach it to the carbon fiber mounting bracket. You can attach the 2 side servo mount pieces before or after, doesn't make any difference, but you definitely need to install, or at least you should install, the servo horn before mounting everything. Actually, you can even attach it to this, just don't install it in the chassis until you've centered your servo. Originally, I was going to go with the KISS, but since this is going to be a super stock car, I am seriously thinking I might as well go with the AA arm. And yeah, there's most of the pieces for the AA arm. The other pieces are actually right here. Alternately, you do have the KISS front end. It's entirely up to you. You can keep it simple, or you can go for tunability. And it's that second reason that I'm seriously thinking I might as well just go with the AA arm. So now we're going to work on the front end. And as I previously stated, I did not know whether I was going to go with the KISS or the AA arm. Well, maybe this kind of gives it away. So here we have all the parts that are needed. Got all the hardware laid out, all the parts. And as you can see, I did do a couple of things in advance. I've got the front axles already attached. I got the nuts already mounted. The steering arms are already put together and properly measured, so that can just save me some time at this point. So there is everything laid out. Gonna put it together, or I'll probably put part of it together and then come back. Alright, so first 5 steps are completed. After the first 5 steps, this is what you should have. Free turning. The arm moves up and down free, and the lower part of the post has free articulation. Now note, in regards to the 2 set screws, or grub screws, those are going to be the droop screws. What I recommend is screwing them in past the bottom, and then using your nail as you slightly unscrew it. Just do a little bit at a time until you have, your nail can go across it. That way at that point in time that they are perfectly flat with the rest of the arm. Okay, so there you have the front assembly complete minus the shocks. So a couple of things to note. One, for those who have actually gone over the instructions, you're going to notice that the caster shims are missing. Unfortunately, they were missing from my kit. Reflex Racing is getting those shipped out to me ASAP, but just to give you a little heads up. So, they are 2 millimeters thick each. You can put both of them behind, and that will give you, so let me flip this around. Obviously, this is the back. So you can do both of them behind, and that will give you 4 degrees of caster. You can do one behind and one in front. That will give you 2 degrees of caster. And although the manual doesn't mention it, theoretically you could put all 4 in front and have 0 caster. I'm probably going to be running one in front, one in back for 2 degrees, but just got to wait for those to get here. This actually is the front, sorry about that. Shock tower, obviously front. Plus steering arms, obviously back. So the other thing is, when you are putting in the pins for the upper A-arms, there's a flat section in the pin. You definitely want to make sure that that is facing upright, so that when you put in the grub or set screws, as they're calling them, that they will seat right into that. The other trick is, once you get it tightened enough that the pin is not going to fall out, but the pin can still slide forward, backward, you want to push that pin as far forward as you can, so that the front of the pin is actually sticking out as much as possible from the front end. The reason is that there's only 2 screws holding the shock tower, but as you can see, the pins themselves are actually part of what helps to hold the shock tower in place. Now, I'm not too concerned. I know you can see that the pins are a little uneven. You can see that the right side, the pin does not come all the way forward, and that's because, one, I did not use Loctite on these for now, and that is because, again, I am missing the 2 shims, the caster shims. So once I get those in, once I receive them, install them, then this side will be pushed forward just like this one. The reason, part of why this one is back is so that I can show you what it looks like if this pin is pushed back as opposed to this pin being pushed forward. So there you go. That is the front assembly, essentially complete, minus the front shocks and of course the steering arms, the drag links. So gonna get those worked on, and then I'll be back. Okay, so there you have it. That is the front end assembly complete, with a few minor exceptions. So a couple things I'll point out. One, as with when I was working on the rear center spring and the side tubes, I do not have the grease with me, so the front springs or front shocks are installed without any grease. I'll have to remove those when I get back. So the bottom being screwed in plastic, you're not going to use any Loctite. However, the top being screwed into an aluminum shock tower, you will want to use Loctite on those. I did not, because I will have to remove and work in the grease. I had previously installed the front axles, as I mentioned a while back, but as you can see, the steering pivot balls are now installed, and still, definitely free movement. It's easier to do it this way. Plenty of free movement. no stiffness at all. So at this point, the front end assembly is ready to be installed on the chassis. Okay, so there we have the front assembly attached to the rest of the chassis, but I did find it. There you go. Attaching the front end is as simple as 3 of the M2x4 countersunk or flathead screws, and there you have it. That is the RX28SE. The only thing remaining is to get some wheels and tires mounted and put them on. So let's get that part finished and then be back. But before I mount up the tires to the wheels, should be noted that the kit does come with 3 sets of wheels. So there are the front wheels, and there are 2 different sets of rear wheels. If you look at the 2 that it includes, you'll see that there are 11 and 14 millimeter. You'll also notice that there is a different offset. So what you have here is the 11 millimeter wheels have a positive offset that pushes them further out, so that no matter whether you use the 11 or the 14 millimeter, the outer edge from side to side will be exactly the same. Have not decided which I'm going to go with. I did buy tires for both. Just gonna see how they look, and we'll see what I end up with. Be back. Okay, so there you have it. The RX28SE is complete. A couple of final things to note. Of the bearings that are included for the wheels, you're going to have to measure them because there are going to be, most of them have an ID of 2.5 millimeters. 2 of them have an ID of 3 millimeters. The reason is that the front axles have a 3 millimeter diameter. So you are going to need to measure the IDs of the bearings to determine which 2 have the 3 millimeter IDs. Those go on the inside of the front wheels. The outside of the front wheels, as well as the rear wheels, all use the 2.5. And as you might be able to tell, I decided to go with the 14 millimeter wide rear tires. When mounting them, don't forget to mount them with the tread in the correct pattern. As you can see, I mounted them backwards. I will fix that later, but other than that, she is complete, other than the rest of the electronics. If you think you know what body this bumper is for, post your guess in the comments. So, there you have it. The Reflex Racing RX28SE. And as this day ends, you know, when I first started the build, I was working the Pro Bowl. And as we set the sun on this beautiful day, where am I? Working the Super Bowl. Okay, this is a bonus add-on that I filmed before departing for the Super Bowl. And this is for those who want to do the KISS front end. So obviously if you've already watched the rest of the video up through now, then you know that I decided to do the AA arm. Now it should be noted that in regards to what the downloadable directions state, not all the parts that are stated here are included. For example, it shows 2 different pairs of the symmetric eccentrics. The standard ones are designed to give you 1.5 degrees of camber, and the other 2 are actually cut at an angle, so depending on what angle what direction you install them, it either gives you a 1 degree or 2 degree. For this kit, they only include the standard, so you will get 1.5 degrees, which is perfectly fine. Also, the kit, the instructions indicate 3 and 2x4 countersunk screws. These are not included in this, and the reason is that they're already in part of the screw kit, because no matter whether you install the AA arm or the KISS front end, either one requires those same screws. Now it does mention that you get 2 of the 0.25 millimeter shims, and they actually give you 4. So you can set it how you want. You can either do 2 or 0 or 4. In other words, 1 or 0 or 2 on each side. So be back in a few with it put together. And there you have the KISS front end. Very easy, very quick, simple to put together. I mean, literally, it's nothing more than putting the silver eccentric on top of each side, screwing the longer upper and the shorter lower kingpins into the steering arms, putting a one shim, no shims, 2 shims underneath, putting 1 shim, no shims, 2 shims on top. Depends on how you want to position the steering arm. So for this, I don't know if you can tell, but I put 1 shim underneath, 1 shim on top. Then after that, you have the lower spring perch, the spring, and then the support arm, 2 screws, and I mean, seriously, that's it. That's how easy the KISS front end is. They don't call it keep it simple, for no reason at all. So there you go. There's the KISS front end for those who want to do the KISS front end instead of the AA arms. Okay, wait. I bet you thought the video was over. Well, it's not. Got one last thing to show you. As probably most people who've looked at the RX28SE, and I don't know, maybe even just the standard RX28, body posts are not included. Something you see attached right now. Now, as previously covered during the build, you do have the body, this carbon fiber piece here for mounting hard bodies, standard Kyosho and other bodies that are, hard plastic. And for those, obviously, you would be using a front bumper that has the clip system that clips into the front of the body. But for those who are going to be using Lexan bodies, obviously, body posts are needed. And again, for those who've looked at the RX28 kits, body posts are not included. So you will need to add those on your own, or in the case of some Lexan bodies, the body posts, as well as the vehicle-specific bumper, will be included in those kits. Okay, now we're done. And, apologies for the messiness on my desk, but I am in the process of working on another project, which will be revealed in an upcoming video. Mahalo, and until next time.